Hello and welcome to the next instalment of the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries Coach and Development Series. My name is Orazio Santalucia and I work in regional services in the Peel office. This series is designed to provide some professional advice and practical advice and information for coaches across all sport in WA. Today, we are very fortunate to have Jamie Douse as a guest presenter. Now, Jamie he works with the West Australian Football Commission as the Southwest Talent and Coaching Manager. He's also the Southwest Academy of Sport Program Manager for football, Australian rules football, and holds many qualifications across not only just AFL football, but across sport in general. So he's a level 2 AFL coach, currently on the road to completing his level 3. He also holds a graduate certificate in sports coaching, working towards his masters, Australian Strength Conditioning or Strength Coaching Association, ASCA level 2, and Australian Weightlifting Federation level 2, amongst a plethora of other qualifications. So we're very fortunate to have Jamie on the line. So Jamie, welcome to the Coach and Development Series.
Thanks, Orazio, and thanks for having me, mate.
Not a problem. We're very, very fortunate to have you along. So our discussion today and the subject matter is going to be planning and workload management. And they're very important factors within coaching. And it's probably an area that is probably neglected a little bit and can have some serious repercussions moving forward to the success of the coach and the success of your role as a coach to provide a great development platform for all your players and athletes that are under you. So with that in mind, we're going to sort of discuss planning to start with you, Jamie. So why is planning important in coaching?
Multitude of reasons, Orazio. You just mentioned then, a lot of people don't plan. Mm-hmm. A lot of coaches don't plan. And a common theme is that I don't have the time to plan my sessions. And if you do actually take the time to plan your sessions, you'll find that you have more time. They sort of feed into each other. So if you plan your sessions, it can take 10 minutes mm-hmm. to plan a 1.5 hour training session. Yep. And that gives you a bit of peace of mind. It gives you a bit of guidance as to where your session will go. Mm-hmm. So it gives you some structure and some guidance as to the content of your session and what you're going to focus on. If you don't have that plan, if you're coaching kids, they'll pick up pretty quickly that you're not organised, and then you start to get behavioural issues, which a lot of community coaches would experience that mm-hmm. a lot, is behavioural issues within their playing group and how to manage those issues. And one of the things that can help you with that is having planned sessions. Mm-hmm. Definitely. So you get that peace of mind with the structure.
Definitely. And the part there where you mentioned how your group can pick up very quickly if you're not planned, and your session's a little bit chaotic. And not that chaos is a bad thing in a coaching session, and that's probably a discussion for another day, Jamie. But the fact that you're sort of guessing and there's no real flow to your session, or you're not ready, you're still setting things up as you're going. It's just the little things that make a big difference. And in an environment where we're time poor, planning becomes probably even more important. When you think, Jamie?
Yeah, and when you're chasing yourself and you haven't got something organised, then that's when you tend to do the things like, okay, if it's footy as an example, okay, do a lap, okay, mm-hmm. do 2 laps. And straight away, you've lost 10 minutes of time where you could be having a far greater impact. So if you've got something planned and the players can just come in and they do that straight away, mm-hmm. and then it can flow into the content that you have throughout the session, then you just maximise the amount of time that you have. And we have to remember that when you're coaching in the youth space, or children, they're at school all day where everything mm-hmm. is structured. Yeah. So they understand it, and a lot of them thrive on that structure. And it also means that if you're not organised, they'll pick up on it. And that's when you have those troubles.
And that continues all the way through, doesn't it? That continues all the way through too, doesn't it? I mean, even the professional athletes. So, you get to rub shoulders through some of the programs you work with in the state programs where you've got, some of the elite players, and they thrive in that structure, don't they? They really want to know when they get to training, this is what we're doing. This is what's expected of me. This is how I'm preparing to get to training, knowing that I've got to do A, B, C. Do you find that sort of helps with development as well?
Yeah, definitely, because it takes all that doubt out of their mind. And so they can come to training and they can focus on the things that they want to focus on to become better. So it takes all of that out of the equation. They don't have to worry about it. They just get to training, and you've got your session content, and they can just get straight into it. And then it should just flow from activity to activity throughout the session. So it's ideal for the players too, and that filters through from if you're doing it with children, youth, or through to elite level adults. They all thrive on the same thing as far as some structure goes. But then in saying that, there's things that, for want of a better word, that we can dictate that happen at training or happen as part of our structure. And then outside of that, there does need to be a lot of opportunity for players to have choice and buy-in as to what's happening. If it's all just us dictating and this is what you have to do, then that just doesn't work. And that's not how sport's played, is it? No, it's not. Nothing happens perfectly. So we need to be able to provide the athletes the opportunity to adapt through sessions.
No, definitely. So with that in mind, it's easy to think that planning's all just simply let's write a few things about a couple of drills that we're going to do this particular session coming up. I've got a training session tomorrow. My 20 kids that I've got in my squad or whatever, we're just going to do A, B, and C, and we're going to reflect on last week, because last week in the game, we missed 10 tackles, we dropped 6 catches, we weren't fast enough. So that's what we're going to work on this particular session, because that's the most important thing. What happened last week, it's got nothing to do with the whole long-term journey of an athlete developing, no matter be it at elite level or be it at community entry level. It's a journey to get to somewhere. So with that in mind, planning, what does it look like? Because it's more than focusing on last week, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think anyone that's coached, no matter the level, would have found themselves doing that knee-jerk reaction to what's happened on the weekend. I think we've all been guilty of it, and I find myself falling into that trap on occasion. It's very easy to do. At an elite level, teams are working, or individual athletes are working on perhaps a 4-year cycle if it's Olympics. And it could even be a 2 or 3 year cycle with elite sporting teams. AFL, NBL, what's the National Soccer League? NSL. So no matter the sport, those team sports at the top level, even those guys are working beyond just 1 year, because like you mentioned before, it's actually about a journey which encompasses more than just the one season that you're in. And that's the same in the youth space or community senior space, is that players are on a journey, and it's our job to provide them with a skill set as they go through that is relevant to where they're at in that journey. So elite level would be anywhere from 1 year to 4 years. And I would think that at a community level, and I know that we do this with our development squad programs, is we're generally just working on a season cycle. So from a pre-season period to an in-season period And then if you're in a competition where there's finals, then your finals period, which would, you know, be what your goal is. And at the end of the season, you have your transition to the next season. If we're talking youth sport, you know, there probably is no transition. Once one season finishes, they roll into their next sport, which is ideal. I think, as you would know, these days we have a lot of crossover with sports, so it's not quite that clean anymore. A lot of sports run into each other as far as their seasons go. So back to how you set it up, you have your pre-season, which is however long it might be, you know, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months, whatever you have access to. And that's the period really where you're laying the foundations for what's going to come in the season. So if we're talking children or youth, then it's very much about developing fundamental skills in an enjoyable and safe environment, because that's, you know, that's what they're there for. They're generally there for enjoyment. So let them enjoy themselves and have some structure around that, where we are developing the skill sets for later on in that sporting experience. So that really just depends on your sport, the age group that you're coaching, and that drives what you're going to focus on. And probably a bit, you know, what's the level of skill of your group? Do you need to be going back to very basics, or, you know, have you got some talent and can perhaps stress them with something that's a bit more taxing? So yeah, your pre-season should really set you up for your in-season. And once your in-season starts, you're generally still focusing on what you were doing in the pre-season, because that's what's going to take you through the season. You may find that from week to week there are things that perhaps you might want to work on, things that you identify from games that feed out of your in-season. So what have you developed in the in-season? And then as you go through the season, are there things that are coming up that we need to revisit? And yeah, you revisit those throughout the season. You might even like to break your season up into 4-week blocks, where you're still focusing in 4 weeks, you're still focusing on just 3 or 4 key aspects. And you stick with that no matter what happens on the weekend or during the week. And if you're doing that, and if you're sticking with it for a period of time, you'll start to get success in what you're trying to achieve. And by success, we're not talking about winning. We're talking about outcomes that you've determined you're after. If you're only doing that week to week, then the chances of that actually being implemented and therefore being successful are pretty unlikely. Because players need time to experience what you're exposing them to at training, and then transfer that to a game. And that'll generally takes more than a week. It might even take a few months for some things.
Because you're dealing with a whole heap of other things, aren't you? The other factors that are coming in would be like the maturation of if you're with kids. So we'll probably, for those that are listening and watching at the moment, you might be working with an under 14 group, whatever the sport is. That is a huge growth area. So at the start of your time with them in the year, that group of 14-year-olds might be 5'2", and then by the end of the year they might be 5'6". So that little growth throws everything out the window. Their movement patterns and everything that comes with it. And then there's the internal stuff, like their brain development and everything like that. And then somewhere along the line, you're still trying to teach them how to kick a drop punt, or how to get a better right-hand handball, or something along those lines. There's a lot to deal with. So their development's going to go all over the place, isn't it, really?
Yeah, that's a great point, mate. And no matter the sport, when you get those periods of accelerated growth, you can expect that skills will go backwards as the young athlete learns and adapts to the new body that they have. Their hands further away from their trunk, their foot's further away from their trunk. If it's basketball shooting, how does that affect their mechanics? If it's kicking a ball, how does that affect their mechanics? Because everything's further away. So
yeah,
players, if they have time to make those adjustments, and if we allow them to do that and accept the fact that there will be some regression before we get progression through those periods, it's really important that as coaches, we are allowing players the opportunity to work through that, and that we understand, and we relay that to them and potentially their parents.
Yeah,
because that can become a frustration for the player, and parents may not understand exactly what's happening. So as coaches, if we can educate on that, that can make it a much easier journey.
Yeah,
and we see kids all the time that get really frustrated with that regression in their technique, and therefore their effectiveness in whatever the skill is. Yeah, and then like you say, just the plasticity of the brain and the changes that goes through during that time. And when an athlete is trying to reset a technique, that requires a lot of repetition and a lot of work, so that it feeds back into the neural system, and the skill returns to the level that it was at prior to, that growth period.
So would you say that that's where, like, that scenario there would be a real great example of why you want to sort of stick with the plan you had at the start? Like, don't fall into the trap of reacting to, hey, my three kids can't, they were kicking great last week, but 2 weeks down the track you haven't factored in that they've grown an inch, or whatever it is. So that's just, as you just mentioned, it just throws the mechanics all over the place. So don't react to it, just stick with the plan, because it's a long journey, and you're just providing your part in your I guess you're part of their journey as well. So you're at this step and this moment in time, you're providing this block, and that's your job.
Yeah, we're there to facilitate that period, and it's frustrating for a coach as well. And you get frustrated. You don't understand why things are going backwards, why people aren't getting better. But there's that period where it has to be a challenge, so that we can work through it and come out the other side, and the athlete is better at whatever it is that we're trying to help them improve on. And it's very easy when you're frustrated and you start to doubt what you're doing to start reacting and go off the plan that you've set. If you can stay the course, and it might not even be that it happens for you. It might be that throughout the entire season, an athlete is with you, they just struggle, and then they come back the next season and it's not a struggle for them anymore. And it might be that another coach benefits from the work that you've put in. Staying the course with the athlete, being patient is key in that area. And if you're getting frustrated and chopping and changing all the time, the athlete is unlikely to improve. And then that becomes not a burden, but the athlete loses their enjoyment for what's happening. And if they're losing their enjoyment, then chances are they move away from the sport. And if we're talking just beyond sport, they move away from physical activity. And physical activity is something that we ideally encourage for your lifespan, for a healthy lifestyle. So it's just so important that we stick with it and work through the plan that we have.
Definitely. So with
that, sorry, if just on a reference there, is if coaches do a bit of research into long-term athlete development, and there's a lot of models out there that you can access. Some sports even have their own long-term athlete development model. Now it's not a perfect model. There are some flaws, But for a community coach or, you know, someone in that space, it's a really terrific point to start.
Yep.
And we can include some links there. We
will definitely. So in the show notes, whether you're listening to this via podcast or you're watching this via the podcast, in the show notes, there'll be links to resources. So there'll be some websites that we both sort of agree that are useful. And we might even put some templates up that you could use to help with your planning. There's no one way to set up a planning session necessarily in regards to what it looks like on your spreadsheet or on your A4 bit of paper or whatever. But sometimes some people just might appreciate, something as a starting point. So with the planning, so we've got, because you mentioned that the different levels, so you've probably got like your year or your season plan. Like this is what we're going to look like pre-season, in-season, post-season, all that sort of stuff. And then there's you mentioned the blocks. So you might do it in 4-week blocks as you're breaking it up, because that's like the whole season plan can look pretty daunting at times. So you want to just block it up and make it, small bite-sized chunks. And then your session plan, I dare say, would come out of those blocks, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, you'll be starting at one point with the goal of getting to an end point. So where do you start? And then what do you put in place to be able to tick off certain landmarks along the way? So I'll use an example, and it's from footy, and it's something that's fresh in mind from this year. We are coaching 15, 16-year-olds who are at very different levels physically. So we've got kids that are 190 centimeters and 85 kilos, and then we have at the other end kids that are 160 centimeters and 60 kilos. Now, a big part of AFL and other sports like rugby league, and you even go as far as netball, basketball, soccer, is just the ability to physically handle yourself. So in footy, it's a very physical game with 360-degree contact potential. And we have a lot of kids that come into programs that really don't have any idea about the very, very basics of protecting themselves in a physical contest. So when they first come into the program, we break it down to the very, very basics and focus purely on a technique at low velocity and give players the opportunity, and I'm talking about a month with 2 training sessions a week, where it's low velocity and the focus is purely on getting your body in the right position to either be able to implement a tackle safely or to be able to absorb some body contact. So we'll do that for a month before we will move on from a basic technique at low velocity to the basic technique at a higher velocity. And that'll be another month. So over a 3-month period, we go from very low velocity to eventually high velocity, with contact coming from a variety of different positions. So in doing that, we just provide a real structure and an opportunity for the players to develop that attribute. If we just come in and we go straight away into high velocity, then there's kids at both ends that just aren't comfortable or competent in that space.
And you said
that's just an example that's fresh in mind from what we're doing at the moment.
And you've brought in elements of coaching 101, which is like safety. I mean, in a contact sport, your number one priority there is to protect the athlete. You want to make sure that they come out of this experience as safe and as healthy as they can be for their own well-being, which is number one priority. And number 2 priority is you want them to think footy's a game for life somehow. Be it they continue and they're very fortunate to be in that small percentile that goes on to make a career out of it, or they continue playing footy and they play for their local club and they go on to play masters football because they just love football so long, and they just keep going and going and going and being part of a club environment, part of the sport, which should be our end game, really. I mean, we want lifetime athletes, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Yep. yeah, we want lifetime participants. They're the life and blood of community sport, which in Australia is such a massive part of our culture. It's something that a lot of other Western countries in particular don't actually have a thriving community sport.
Yeah, we take it for granted, don't we, sometimes?
Country, yeah. And Orazio, you mentioned safety, and I might be digressing a little bit. It should be part of planning, though, and it's not just safety around physical aspects of sport. It's also that athletes feel safe in the environment that you create. So it is an integral part of planning, is that athletes feel safe, and that's safe as in safe to try things without fear of being chastised. Safe to be able to have input into conversations, group conversations. If you don't have that relationship and players don't feel safe, then anything beyond that you are trying to teach becomes very, very difficult. We know, I know as an adult, that if someone's telling me what to do and I don't have a relationship with them where I'm comfortable them telling me what to do, then just the barrier goes up. And we have that with youth athletes. That's been a massive shift in the programs that I'm involved in, is moving away from everything being instruction and feedback, and firstly creating an environment where players are safe, and then we can start having those conversations with them, and we build relationships, understand the players, understand what works specifically for certain players, what methods of communication. When we've got all of that happening, then we will see progress.
Yeah.
But if you're going in at the very first instant and you're just giving it to them, you're probably going to struggle to get buy-in with the whole group. You'll get it with some, but you'll struggle with the whole group. So it does feed back into planning. Those aspects where you can develop relationships with players at training are key as part of your planning as well. And I think I'm pretty sure you would agree that doesn't matter whether it's a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 30-year-old, or a 50-year-old. If you're coaching, that it's a key part of coaching, and it's probably something that most coaches would overlook.
100%.
I think you come from that environment where, because it's a coach, they know everything, and I have to do what they say. Especially our generation, the generation coming through, that's not what they're like.
And that sits in the planning very well. No, not at all, because that actually sits in the planning very well there, because you're not expected to know everything as a coach. Far from it. I think if that's how you're entering the role, you're probably in the wrong role. So being able to plan an element of a season or a training program where you're going, well, look, this is way out of my skill set, but what I've planned to do is get in someone that can deliver that element, makes a massive difference, because you don't just want to grab someone and try to fit them into the jigsaw. You want that jigsaw piece to fit. So by planning this out and structuring it out, it all makes sense. So you know that you've booked this particular person to come into your program well in advance. They know exactly what's coming in. You've got your players ready for that period for them when this other person comes on board, and then you can pick it up at the other end as seamlessly as you can. It's not going to be perfect, but as seamlessly as you can. So if you've planned all that, that works. Whereas if you haven't, and you just decided this week on a whim, I'm going to get the first 11 captain to come down and take fielding or batting or whatever. And well, where does that fit in? It's just a random act. Yeah. It's just a random. It doesn't make much sense. So I think it fit in quite well.
Yeah, you want everything to flow so that everything you're doing has a purpose, and it fits in with what your end goal is. And even a little bit of an extension to that is understanding that the human resources that you have at your disposal within your own club, within your own team, and using those. So planning helps you do that too.
Yeah.
And that can be another dad who's an assistant coach and he's at training all the time. And if he's someone that you trust with the group, then it allows you to be a little bit more versatile and add different components to your training. Mm-hmm. And it might allow you to have, smaller groups at training so that you can get more one-on-one coaching. So understanding the human resources that you have access to, and then aligning those with your overall plan is another key, especially for the community coach. Maximising the resources that you have at your disposal.
Definitely. So we've spoken at length here about planning. So for someone who, it's your role, you do it every day through your professional role and in all your various roles, you wear a number of hats. What does it look like to you? So for the listeners and all that sort of stuff. So you're planning, you're working with some of the better talented footballers, AFL footballers in the Southwest region. And within your programs, what does a plan, a yearly plan or season plan look like?
They differ depending on the age group. Mm-hmm. We generally have, with our teams, we generally only have them for a short period of time. So the group that we currently have working is, I think they've been since December 2021, and they'll finish up with us at the end of April. So we get them for 4 or 5 months, which I suppose is effectively almost a community season.
Yeah.
So initially it's an assessment of what we have, where is the playing group at. The group that we have this year is quite talented, as opposed to previous years where there hasn't been the depth of talent. So this year we could adjust what we were doing because we were comfortable that with the depth of talent that we could probably do some things at a bit of a higher level. Mm-hmm. So that's a case of, okay, what's the talent that we have? And then talking and meeting with the other coaches about where we see, where are we at and where do we need to be? Whilst we aren't about winning, it's very much about being competitive. And it's very much about players having the opportunity to go out and really challenge themselves against their peers. Mm-hmm. So what do we need to put in place over the next 2 to 3 months so that when we play our first game, it's not, it's going to be a shock, but how can we take some of that shock out of it? How can we best prepare them? So once we've spoken as a group, then we set about structuring the skills that we think we need to focus on. And we would have, I think this year we had 5 or 6 different skill sets, and they're all just the basic stuff with the sport that we're involved in. So that would be the same as any sport. Mm-hmm. Through youth levels, is that you're only focusing on 5 or 6 key areas. There's no planning around how we want to play, structures, game style, a little bit of game style, but the bulk of it is around the development of basic skill set, because that's the level we're at. We understand that we have the players for a short period of time and we're preparing them for the next step. Yeah. So that's what guides our training curriculum. Mm-hmm. Then as the games come into effect, we still very much stick with what we decided at the outset was our focus. Mm-hmm. And look, we might add a few things. So we played a game on the weekend and there were a couple of things that were evident in the way that we played that we can make adjustments to, but they still fit in with everything that we've done so far. Yeah. We recognise some aspects of our gameplay that weren't at the level, but we're not going to go away and do that this week and then next week do something else. Mm-hmm. So the coaching group decide what we're doing, where we're going, and then while we're in this phase where we're playing, there are weekly discussions it all feeds back into what we had decided at the beginning was where we wanted to go.
Yeah.
And for us, where we want to go is we want the best talent moving into a state program, and we want the talent below that to be competent and to feel like they've achieved something, because we know that out of that group, there'll be players in 2 years' time that will overtake all of those kids, and they will be the ones that will be transitioning into a state program, senior state league football, or potentially elite level sport. Yeah, so that's how we structure it, and then we have weekly training plans that feed into our curriculum. Yeah.
So I think there you've really highlighted pretty much what we've sort of discussed, is that you stick to your initial plan, and there's going to be adjustments along the way. There's no doubt, and that leads us into our next little topic a little bit. But the fact that you still say no, we're not reacting to what happened on Saturday or Sunday, whatever your game was. We're going to keep going here. Okay, now we've seen 2 games in a row where the same issues are occurring. But then you look back to your season plan and you're going, well, it sort of fits in there anyway. So we will address this because it's actually what we're up to in our curriculum, I guess, that we've sort of set out.
Yeah.
You're not reacting.
No, and mate, if you're reactive, everyone gets confused. So your playing group starts getting confused. So you share your plan with your playing group. This is our plan for the next 3 months. This is where we want to go. And this is how we're going to go about it. So if you share that with them, you get buy-in. But then if you start shifting away from it every week, then it becomes confusing for the player as well. And they don't know what's going on. And whilst they need to be adaptable to be able to thrive in the chaos of sport, they need to have some comfort and some safety in knowing what's happening. And then if you're sharing that with parents, with key stakeholders, then that also gives you probably some security. And everyone knows where you're going. And again, if you start shifting away from that, then all of those stakeholders, they start to ask a lot of questions as well. And that's a key part of your planning, is right at the start, is everyone knows what your focus is. And particularly in community sport, parents understanding what your focus is. If you've relayed that to them at the start of the journey, look, you're still probably going to get some issues along the way. But if everyone knows what the expectations are right from the outset, then you'll minimize the problems that arise for you across the course of the season.
No doubt. So with that, okay, we've sort of said stick to your plan, don't venture off your plan. But, as a coach, I mean, you're a high-level coach. I've done some coaching in my time. There are times the best laid plans just don't work. And you do actually need to adapt, and you do need to change. How important is that?
For a number of factors, it's absolutely critical. Your ability to be flexible, and whilst you've got a beautifully laid out plan, it's not always going to go the way that you like it. And at community sport, it might be because you've planned on having 30 players at training and only 10 turn up. So still being adaptable, but if you've still got that plan and you've got a focus, then you can downsize it to suit the group that you've got. So that aspect of it is really important, that you that you're on the right path there, and you're able to adapt to the challenges that are thrown at you. We work with youth athletes that are quite often good at a multitude of sports. Everyone wants a piece of them, and that can be through school, that can be through another sport that they're playing at the same time. And we get a lot of kids that are state level athletes in perhaps 2 sports. So we the programs that I run, I actually go to extremes to make sure that we aren't overloading kids. I always err on the side of caution, and we back off with what we do. We don't dictate to players that they have to do this, they have to come to this training session. If they don't come to this, they're not playing. Because they're at an age, 15, 16, where they're probably at a point where they have to start making the decision on what they will focus on seriously and what they will still play for fun.
Yeah. It's
a transition phase though. And I don't know that we should be dictating to a 15, 16, 17-year-old, you have to do this and you're not allowed to do anything else. In my experience, that doesn't work. So being flexible around that. We have periods at training where we just basically can't do anything that we want to do because kids are cooked.
Yeah.
And if we add to that load, they're going to break. So yeah, there's so many factors outside of it. There's also people have lives, and social commitments. Those things are equally as important as sporting pursuits. Their school commitments. So we encourage young athletes to be focusing on their school studies, and if they're not doing that, they're potentially working.
Yeah.
And that throws in a whole nother a bunch of issues, and that goes through to senior sport as well, where even at state league level, whether that's soccer, basketball, cricket, footy, a lot of players are still in full-time employment.
So you've got to, factor.
Yeah, you got to factor all that in. It's all stress.
Stress. So that's a great segue into the workload management. So you've sort of briefly touched on it, but with youth athletes in particular, it's probably a growing area that is probably under supported or not understood as much as it probably should be. And you sort of mentioned it there, that it's not about your team, it's not about that team, it's about what's best for that person. And sometimes less is more. So sometimes just saying, look, just go home. Just go home. And that's brave, because some coaches can't see that. They can't understand that. But I know you've done that in our dealings, and it's an important part of that athlete's journey, isn't it? And their well-being, I guess. Yeah.
Well, we have quite a bit of travel involved in our programs as well for players and families. So we go as far as, if you're feeling that way, if there's other commitments, then don't come to training.
Yeah.
We're perfectly okay with you having a chop out. We still expect that they would tell us.
Yeah.
But we would even go as far to say is don't come to training. Just take that time out. You're better off doing what you need to do, or focusing on something else for this period of time, because that's what's better for the athletes, short-term and long-term well-being. Look, sometimes, mate, it's really frustrating because we have things that we've got our plan, and we know that there's certain level of work. You've got to do work to be able to perform in a game, and if the players aren't doing the work, then they're not going to be able to perform at their best. So that's a frustration, but we have to get over it. They're kids. And I think the area where it really falls down is no one takes ownership for it. Everyone wants a piece of the kid. Everyone has their expectations. Very few are prepared to bend. So the kids are pulled in all different directions. No one takes ownership of it. And eventually you get scenarios where young kids are training more than elite athletes. So we don't expect it of an elite athlete. We're happy to take all the sexy stuff off elite athletes, but we won't take that off them. We won't use those examples as best practice. And that's educating players, and I think probably also parents, in addition to coaches. And I would go as far as to say school teachers. A lot of schools these days have programs that cater to good athletes.
Yeah.
And they contribute to the overall workload. But the issue arises when no one is prepared to take ownership and make some hard calls.
Definitely. So part
just wants to please everyone. Sorry, mate.
No, that's okay. So part of this would be, okay, so if you are listening or watching this as a coach, take ownership of the athlete's journey. And as Jamie just said, there's a lot that are playing multi-sport, and that's fantastic. We've encouraged that. That message hasn't changed for a long, long time, and nor should it. But what we do understand is that every sport, every coach has their own demands. So being brave enough and understanding that the best thing you might be able to do is actually lead that conversation that you just mentioned, Jamie, and sort of say, hey, sit down with the athlete. Okay, what's your week look like? And you'd be amazed at the results you get. So just literally get a blank piece of paper and say, right, what's Monday look like for you? What's Tuesday look like for you? What's Wednesday look like for you? And they'll add in, okay, I do PE at school and we're doing cross country at the moment and we're training, we're doing, 4K run. And then after school, I've got basketball. And then tomorrow I've got footy. And then all of a sudden you look at their week and you're tired looking at it. You're tired looking at that piece of paper and seeing what they do. And then hopefully as a coach, you're going, wow, and I'm demanding this, and this out of them. I've got that wrong. I need to pull out. And then the next stage, as you've mentioned, would be that communication element of it, and maybe looking to link everyone up or having a conversation with everyone saying, did you know this? Did you know where they're at? How can we all work together? That's going to help this athlete at the end of the day. And being big enough and brave enough to go, well, the best thing I can do here is cut one night off their training load.
You're right there. Look, a simple activity is to basically do what you've described, and have an athlete fill out a weekly training log, record every session, record how long it lasts for, and then use a rating, exertion rating, to start getting an idea of the volume of training and the intensity. So we do that with the groups that we have come through. And as an example, we've got a kid coming through at the moment who's a talented athlete, and he filled out his weekly training log, and when I got it back, it was either 10 or 11 sessions across the week.
Wow.
And his rating was, every session was at 70% or above, and he had a couple of sessions that he rated the intensity at 100%.
Wow.
And look, really no surprise that he's broken down. And now at an important time in his footy journey, it's not the be all and end all. At an important time though, he's now injured and can't play. And I see that as a bit of a failing of us. I should have been onto that earlier. So, that it's disappointing from that perspective, but it really did highlight exactly the amount of work that some kids do, and it's just not sustainable. It's not sustainable for an elite athlete, and it's certainly not sustainable for an athlete that's going through maturation and the stress that places on the body. And not surprisingly, that kid's broken at a really unfortunate time, which is how it normally goes. So look, we'll work with him and he'll ease back into work. And when you look at his schedule, he's actually, he's grinding himself. He's running himself into the ground. He's actually not strong enough or fit enough to be able to recover from any of the training sessions. So everything just, there's a shadow cast from one training session or one playing experience. It casts a shadow onto your next. And if you're not allowing time to recover, that shadow just becomes bigger and it starts to creep across multiple training sessions, weeks, months,
Yep.
and at some point the athlete will break down.
Mm-hmm.
Some earlier than others, but it will happen
Mm-hmm.
because it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, and we're seeing that at elite level, like, and you hear enough. I mean, we're more informed than ever, I guess, of what the professional athletes world looks like, and training loads and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you've only got to listen to the press conferences and read enough articles, and you sort of get an idea of where programs are sort of going, and players having time off and get given time off to recover mentally more than anything else. But a lot of that stems from physical exhaustion, I guess, and then mentally they become exhausted, yet we're not aware of it at 15 years of age. And your body surely is much more vulnerable at 15 than it is at 25.
Yeah.
So
in elite sport, they've done a big pre-season. They've developed their bodies to be able to cope with the stress that they will go through in season.
Yep.
And then in season, they adapt it. So that their training loads drop right off.
Yep.
Because they've done all their preparation work in season, and in the pre-season. So their pre-season develops them physically to cope with the stress of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Then everything is adjusted in season. Yet we have kids that, they're not that strong. They haven't had that much work put into them. Yet we probably expose them to even greater loads than what an elite athlete is being exposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the EPL with the volume of games that they play. I think they have an 8-week pre-season, something like that. It's very short. And I think the NFL and the NBA, those sports are similar in that there's not a great deal of preparation time, but they get the work in. They're strong enough to cope with the demands of the season. And then in the season, they do very little work outside of games. Yeah. Because their schedule just doesn't allow it.
Mm-hmm. And people...
we do it to kids.
Yeah, people that are listening would probably find that a little bit weird, but I know, having worked in cricket, for instance, some of the training or the non-training that was done between games, depending on the time frame and the schedule, would amaze people. They're doing very, very little. AFL is a great one where players are recovering. That's why they talk about the 5-day, 6-day, 7-day turnaround and all that sort of stuff. Players probably don't touch a football between matches because that's where their training program's at. That's where their physical development's at, and their workload management, which is exactly what we're talking about. And they're measured to the nth degree, aren't they?
Yeah. And that's another thing. Like, they have access to all those tools.
Yeah.
So they can monitor them to death.
Yeah.
And we don't have access to all of that. We don't know how far a kid ran in a game.
No.
We don't know how much of his efforts were high intensity. We just don't have access to that data. So, we probably need to be even more careful with what we do.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So the takeaway there would be, take time to sit down with each of your players, and it depends, I guess, at what level you're coaching at. But you can do this. You can do it this way, as we are here. We're very fortunate to have the ability to do this online now. So it doesn't have to be a training on a Wednesday night. It can be a survey. It can be what we're doing here. Can we block out 20 minutes tomorrow at some time and get yourself as a coach and get the player and mum and dad, or both, or one of them, and just have a chat and just sort of just jot down exactly what happens during the week. And that alone could be the best thing you could do for that athlete moving forward. That particular...
And I think, you mentioned parents as well. It's really, that's a key aspect, is that parents understand the concept as well. So getting their buy-in. I think for perhaps community coaches that, I work full time in a sporting role, so I have a bit more time to to be able to put into those exercises. I think that for a community coach, it might just be a case of getting your whole group to fill out a form, getting them to give them all back to you, and then having a look at what they're doing. And if you can get access to someone that can maybe come in and talk to the whole group as part of a training session, or you might do it outside of training, just so that you can cover across everyone if you don't have the time to be able to sit down with 20, 25 kids, whatever it might be. So by all means, if you have the luxury of being able to sit down with individuals, then do that. And if you don't have that luxury, then try and do it as a group, and at least be educating players and parents on what's happening, what's ideal, and then adapting to what you're doing as well, or adapting what you're doing as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. Okay, so just to quickly wrap up, so we've discussed planning. So with planning, how important it is, what planning a sport, so a season, and then blocks, and then session planning, and what that looks like, the benefits and the good, the bad, and the ugly of planning. Change, like being willing to change that. Okay, this is the plan, this is where we wanted to go, but certain factors have come in that have forced us to change our plan and adapt it as we go. And a big part of that is probably workload management. So you might have had 3 months ago, you might have thought, right, when we get to here, this is where we're going to be, and this is what we want to do. But along the way, a whole heap of things have changed things along the way, and you've had to adapt that, because if you were to continue on that path, I guess the health and well-being of your athlete is probably going to be at risk to a certain extent. So you're still sort of going there, but you've had to take a slight little detour. But at the end of the day, you're doing what's best for the athlete. And and I guess that's probably the underlying factor with all of this is, what's best for the athlete, not what's best for you as a coach, what's best for that group of athletes, or that individual athlete. If you're just working in an individual sport, what's best for them?
Yeah, and again, it probably comes a bit back to the level that you're coaching, a bit, but I dare say that most athletes play for enjoyment and fun, and that's where all of your planning starts, is covering off on that. And then from there, what we've discussed. I'm just thinking there's quite a few things that we've probably glossed over, and there's a few things around planning that we haven't covered off on, but understanding that we've been going for quite a while. And
what we'll do is we'll put those links. We'll put some links and some extra some worksheets in the show notes that might allow you to take this a lot further if you wanted to. And and if you're comfortable, Jamie, as well, maybe even a contact email or something for yourself if someone wanted to follow up and ask you a question. The man is full of some fantastic knowledge, as you've probably taken out of today's session. So look, Jamie, thank you very, very much for your time today. Very much appreciated. And hopefully everyone that's listening or watching or both has taken a lot out of the session today. So thank you very much, Jamie. Good luck for the rest of the season. And hopefully we'll see some more of those young Southwest talented athletes continue along the pathway, and might see a few more draftees in the next draft, which is October or November or whenever it is.
We've got some girls coming up too.
Oh, and girls as well. Yep, that's a big growing area as well. So thank you very much, Jamie. So you've been watching and listening to the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries Coach and Officials Development Series. My name is Orazio Santalucia, and thank you for your time, and hopefully you've enjoyed that, and tune in for our next installment of the Coach Development Series. Thank you very much.